Hey, so here's a short explanation of how threat really works and why it's so important to address threat if you're looking to get better results for yourself in terms of how you look, you feel, you perform, or if you're a fitness professional and it's your aim to help your clients actually get better results. See, a lot of time as a profession, we've had a tendency to, accuse our clients of maybe not being serious or using terms like self-sabotage or, saying that people are weak-willed or don't really have the mindset to get themselves through things. And it's not really as simple as that. You see, a lot of time we confuse mind with brain, and we think that you can mindset your way out of a whole bunch of stuff, right? But it's not as simple as that, because the brain's got a whole bunch of self-defense mechanisms built into it that has you taking certain kind of actions regardless of what you may currently want to be doing. So you might be saying that you want to lose 20 pounds, or you want to help your clients lose 20 pounds, and they may come in for their workouts, and you leave the gym and you're walking past the bakers, and suddenly you decide that you're going to go and have a donut or a piece of cheesecake or something, right? Now, where does this math add up? It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, right? Because on the one hand, you've got a goal, and on the other hand, you're engaging in these behaviors that you or your trainer have described as self-sabotage. Well, look, let me put you at your ease. First things first, there's no such thing as self-sabotage. Nobody who's trying to lose weight actually has a second conversation in their head saying, do you know what, I really don't want to lose weight. I want to go and eat as many foods as I possibly can to make myself fat. That's really not what's going on. There's no cognitive process. And in fact, that's part of the problem, you see, because cognition happens up in the front part of the brain in an area called the prefrontal cortex, which is where all your rationalization and your where you give meaning to things. Cognitive processes, rationalizations, giving meaning is all the prefrontal cortex area of responsibility. However, a lot of the things that go on when threat occurs, and even perception of threat, that happens in a central area in the brain known as the limbic system. Okay, and that limbic system, I won't get too technical, but the limbic system lives in an area of the brain known as the temporal lobe. And one of its responsibilities is to look out for threat. And when it finds threat, it pretty much shuts down the reasoning and cognitive areas of the brain in the prefrontal cortex and kind of says, okay, you don't need to think about things. You don't need to work out cognitively what you want to do here. There is a threat. I'm going to take care of the threat. And once it's gone, then you can go back to thinking. But for now, instead of responding, which is what the prefrontal cortex kind of allows you to do, create responses, your brain goes into a reaction. Okay, so we always talk to people about not being so reactive. It's always better to respond rather than to react. Well, that sounds really great, but the trouble is once you activate your emergency systems, your threat detection systems in your body, you are on high reaction alert. You're not on highly responsive alert. So the two parts of the brain kind of cancel each other out. So it's not exactly your fault, and if you're a trainer, it's not your client's fault that they're finding it very difficult to do that. You've got to understand that threat is present. So here's how threat works. First off, let's have a look at this. First off, understand that the brain is constantly monitoring the environment all the time. Okay, all the time, and it's basically looking first and foremost for any threats to the survival of the organism. That would be you. Okay, so it's perpetually kind of searching to say, given the environment I'm in right now, what is the threat of me? A threat of my death, or threat of injury, or threat of loss of function, or threat of anything. And we'll speak about this a bit more in a second, but it can be any threat to survival. Your brain is constantly checking that, first and foremost, above anything else. So you could say the brain has a slight negativity bias. It's not a naturally positive thing. It's not naturally looking to have you go out and achieve goals. First and foremost, it's looking for threats. It's looking for negative things that would stop you surviving. Okay, so second, it uses the sensory system to ask and answer basically two primary threat questions. Okay, these are the questions that are going on in the brain the entire time. One, can I predict what's about to happen in this environment? So you're walking down the street, and for example, that every step that you take, you're not going to fall through the pavement, or that kind of a building is going to fall on you, or that whatever it is, your brain has kind of said, hey, do you know what? I've done this 100 times before, 1,000 times before. I know that when you step on concrete, when you step on tarmac, you don't fall through it. I'm fairly confident. Therefore, I can predict my environment. You might be walking through a mall. You know that you're not going to get run over in a mall because you say, well, cars don't come into malls. Okay, you can predict your environment. Your brain is constantly looking for methods and means to predict the environment. If it can predict the environment, it feels safe because it knows ahead of time what's likely to happen. Next, it says, can I respond appropriately for this environment? So it can make its predictions, but can it respond? So, for example, given the environment that you're currently in, let's say you are crossing the road, but you're crossing the road, but you sprained your ankle this week. And so you're now limping and you're moving a lot slower than you normally do. Your brain is kind of saying, hey, well, given the speed that vehicle is moving at, I don't really feel safe here. I'm not sure whether I can get across the road in time. So it will create threat, and that threat will create either a fight, flight, or freeze response. When you're probably going to create like a freeze response, you'll probably take longer to cross the road than you normally do. You'll be a lot more careful. You'll wait for a wider time gap, a wider opportunity for you to do that. And this is true in alongside any form of threat. So basically, your brain is saying, can I predict and can I respond appropriately? Okay, and to do this, it uses the sensory system, so sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and balance. Okay, so it's basically, the better your sensory system is, or the better your sensory systems are, the more likely you are to not feel under threat. If you've got a great visual field, if you're not long-sighted, not short-sighted, you don't have an astigmatus, which is like a flicker in your eye field, if your peripheral vision is sound, your eyes are able to kind of say, yep, I've got a really good grasp on what's going on around me, therefore threat goes down. If your sound, let's say it's much harder to cross a road, for example, if you're deaf, right? Or if you have any impairment to sound, because first off, that can associate directly to balance, but secondly, a car might be honking at you, or there might be any number of things going on around you that will increase your threat. And so, with any impairment to sound, your threat goes up. Smell, if impairments to smell can make a big difference to threat from a perspective of the foods that you're going to eat. You could be eating rotten meat. You could be any number of things. You could be in a building where there's the smell of smoke, and everybody else is getting their signal to flee the building, and you're not necessarily getting it just yet. So again, any impairment to smell, and this goes back to, if you want to take it all the way back to caveman days when we had a far more acute sense of smell, and we could actually smell predators kind of sneaking up on us, or maybe even the opportunity for prey for us to go and catch. You'd smell a certain animal passing through your radius. Taste, again, taste gives us an indication about whether the food that we're eating is actually going to be sound for us, or whether it's off and is going to poison us, for example. Touch. The ability to touch is also part of it's part of our proprioceptive system. Okay, and our proprioceptive system allows us to know where our body parts are relative to each other in space. Okay, so any impairments to touch means that it's much harder for us to know where we are in space ourselves, and that touch divides into proprioception and for example spatial awareness, where we are relative to other things. And then of course balance. If you can't balance, your balance is controlled by your vestibular system in your inner ear. If you cannot balance, you're in very great danger of falling over and falling into things and smashing your head over on the pavement, for example. So your threat goes up. And these are the primary systems that we use to sense threat around us. So if there's any form of impairment here, that any compromise to any system increases the risk. And if you increase the risk, you initiate that threat cascade. Just understand, most people have got visual, auditory, kind of smell, kind of taste, touch, balance impairments. Most people, and the more of them that you've got, the more under threat you are. So you may not kind of consider yourself massively under threat, but your brain does, which means your brain goes into playing the game plan that it's got set aside for whenever a threat is present, and it will initiate the threat cascade. Okay, so the threat cascade initiates, and it starts off with the alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala. Okay, and the amygdala is basically a part of your brain that is right next to another specialized part called the hippocampus, where all of your stories, like everything that means something to you, but particularly threat messages, these areas are holding on to messages that kind of say, hold on, that is a threat. You might be walking through a forest one day and you see a black shape on the ground that's kind of loosely coiled. Your amygdala says, snake. It may not be a snake. Your amygdala has just kind of spotted the pattern, and it will ring the alarm bell and tell you to start behaving in the way that's appropriate to either fight, fly, or flee that snake. Okay, so that's the amygdala. The amygdala then kind of sets off a kind of an early process of releasing norepinephrine into the brain. Okay, norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter which both speeds up brain functions so that you can figure out what to do much faster, but it also speeds up the heart rate so that you're pumping blood faster and you're ready for fight or flight. You're either going to run away much more efficiently, or you're going to be more ready to actually engage in flight. If you're going to engage in flight, the blood generally tends to run more to your lower extremities, so your legs actually fill up with more blood. If you're about to engage in fight behaviors, your arms actually fill up with more blood. Okay, so you become stronger in your arms and have more endurance in your arms if you're going to fight, or you become stronger or have more endurance in your legs if you're going to flee. What happens next is the hypothalamus secretes corticotropin releasing hormones, which basically spur the pituitary gland into action. The pituitary itself then releases a hormone known as ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, which targets the adrenal gland. Okay, so the adrenal gland sit all the way down on your kidneys, and once the adrenal gland gets stimulated, your body then starts to produce both adrenaline for the short term, which fires up your body ready for that fight or flight, and cortisol, which actually enables you to sustain the threat response if necessary. So both of those hormones get triggered. So basically, essentially what's happening now at this point is the true fight, flight or freeze response is about to take place. Okay, that threat response. Fight, flight, freeze. And basically it's all triggered as a primary means to survive threat. This also means, though, that when you move into the fight, flight or freeze part of your brain, into that branch of the nervous system, that everything other than fight, flight or freeze, everything other than your survival mechanisms go on a go slow, which means the opposite part of the brain. So your fight and flight part of your brain now shuts down the cognitive part of your brain. It says you don't need to be thinking too much. I don't want you thinking about whether this is a good idea. I just want you reacting to the environment right now so that you can survive. So it shuts down cognition. It shuts down the ability to think rationally. It also shuts down the rest and digest branch of the nervous system, the parasympathetic side, because obviously you digesting your meal and repairing your body tissues is relevant to the threat that's in front of you right now. So that shuts down. So bear in mind what this might mean for things like your ability to burn fat. That's not a the best way to think about this is you've got a branch that's dedicated to survive and the other branch that's dedicated to thrive. Okay. You might be wanting to thrive, and anytime you're thinking better, I want a better body, or I want a better job, or I want a better income, or whatever, that's all thrive stuff. That's got nothing to do directly with your survival. So your brain kind of takes away your ability to work on thrive, and instead says, yeah, I don't really care. Right now, I want to just keep you alive. So bear in mind that most of the goals that you're working on are not a priority for the brain at all as soon as you move into that response. Okay, human physiology gives all of its priority to survival first. Performance, goals, looking better, feeling better, performing better, they all get down-regulated as long as that threat remains. So bear in mind, I've said as long as the threat remains, that can be any threat to the visual field, the vestibular field, the respiratory field, or any of the senses that I just discussed can actually directly affect your survival chances, which means that a lot of your goals for looking better, feeling better, performing better are actually put on a go slow. They're put on pause. Okay, thrive activities aren't a priority as long as the survive activity dominates. Okay, so just bear that in mind. How much of the survival mechanisms are you tripping? How many survival alarms are you tripping through the way you currently treat your body, through the diet you eat, through the way you handle stress, and so on and so forth? So this includes all your weight loss goals, your appearance goals. All of these things are basically on hold. And we may go actually, we generally tend to call things like this stress, right? I'm under stress, I'm under a lot of stress. Your brain doesn't call it stress, your brain calls it threat. Okay, so bear in mind physical stress, emotional stress, sleep deprivation based stress, nutritional stress, physical stress, like as in your body full of aches and pains, or your body not being fit enough for the task, carrying too much weight, not carrying enough muscle, putting your heart under too much demand for your current level of fitness, and so on and so forth. All of this you may actually call stress. Your doctor may call it stress. Your brain basically is using the language threat, and we know it's using the language threat because it initiates the threat response each and every time. Okay, so what we're getting at here is that if you want to get a really great result in terms of looking better, feeling better, performing better, achieving your goals, moving into the thrive half of the nervous system, you really do have to kind of go about this in a different way to the way you've been doing it up to now. The way you've been doing it up to now is essentially stressing yourself out about the goals that you're not achieving. So if you find yourself stressing yourself out about your weight and stressing yourself out that the scales aren't moving and that the inches aren't moving, and that the results aren't happening quickly enough, just understand that all of that adds to the stress, in other words the threat, and that you're actually keeping yourself from achieving your goals. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need to, if we want to achieve our goals faster, essentially reduce the threat, and that means taking a much more holistic approach to what's going on in your body. That means looking at each one of your sensory systems, and is my visual field intact? Is my auditory field intact? My hearing? Is my smell? My taste? My touch? My balance? My coordination? Am I breathing correctly? Are all of these things intact? If all those things are intact, then you are well on your way to actually having some much faster, much better results that you keep for longer. Because here's the flip side of this as well, that all those results that you gain that you lose again straight away, and you return back to your old behaviours, it's because the new behaviours that you've engaged in are simply being perceived by your brain as threat. Okay, so straight away it's saying, I don't want you doing those things because you hate them, you feel sore all the time, you feel hungry all the time, you're feeling deprived all the time, you're feeling emotionally off-centered all the time. Therefore, all of that is a threat, and I'm going to do what a really good brain should do, is move you back out of the threat. And how does it move you back out of the threat? It moves you back to the old behaviours, which they may not be ideal, but at least it says, well, I can predict what's going to happen, and I also have a response scenario set up. Okay, so there's a lot going on around stress and threat, and there's a lot that is keeping you from your current ability to achieve the results that you want. If you're serious about getting the best possible results in the fastest possible time and keeping them for the longest possible duration, then you need to work with someone who understands what threat is and how to address that threat in the system. Okay, so I hope you found this at least a little bit interesting. It's a different take, a different perspective on getting results and keeping them in the long term. And yeah, I hope you share it with people that have been caught up in that cycle of maybe not getting results at all, getting them but never being able to keep them. So this has been me, Dax Moy, from Dax Moy Personal Training Studios and FitSystemTraining.com. Take care.